Hi, my name is Sid Puranik, and today we're going to try to defuse the Kurdish crisis by looking at research that I've done over the past 6 weeks and asking ourselves a couple of key questions. First, we have to look at what exactly the problem is. The problem right now with the Kurds is that they're a nomadic independent group that's residing within northern Syria and southern Iraq. They're currently trying to find their own piece of land to live and reside on to try to establish themselves as a formal state. At the same exact time, however, they're trying to escape persecution from a multitude of governments and international organizations, including the Iranian government, the Iraqi government, the Syrian government, the Turkish government, and other groups like the Islamic State, better known as ISIS. The problem is, they're trying to establish that land while at the same time, they're facing their own kinds of problems. At the exact same time, however, they're also undermining Middle Eastern politics. But the US's own influence oversteps all of that regulation and actually helps the Kurds in a certain way. Because as we've seen over the past year and a half now, the Kurds have actually been proven essential to fighting and taking back major strongholds from the Islamic State in countries like Syria and Iraq as well. While they don't actually bear a legitimate onus to do so, they do it anyways. That's where the US comes in, and that's what the US actually stands for. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves today's question. Should the US actually back an independent Kurdish state, rather the formation of it? However, it's also important to look at the why this is a problem. This is the current leader of the Kurds who recently resigned, and his name is President Barzani. He's been a figurehead of new independence within the entirety of the group, but he's also faced a lot of problems within his past, including a new constitution trying to set up the Kurds as an independent state. But at the same time, he's also had a very difficult time at actually working with other nations like the US and those in the Middle East altogether. We also have to ask ourselves the question of where this actually takes place, and as I said before, the Kurds actually reside within northern Syria and southern Iraq. These two regions themselves, though, are faced with a lot of turmoil. Syria especially, with a weak leadership, is faced with a power vacuum and the Islamic State currently residing in it, and Iraq is also faced with problems like those of corruption as well, because weak leadership undermines everything that the people actually want, which is essentially a democracy. The next question we have to ask ourselves is just two. In order, these are the leaders of first, Turkey, next, Iraq, and finally, Syria. This is President Recep Erdogan, this is President al-Abdi, and this is President Bashar al-Assad. The problem is, the thing that all three of these leaders share in common is first, corruption, two, weak leadership, and three, they're almost despised by their own people, making it extremely difficult to actually help them in the first place. The reason this is so problematic, though, is that all three of these leaderships want to maintain figurative power over their own people. The problem is, the Kurds would need a legitimate piece of land to live on, and that's problematic for every single one of these leaders because they essentially want to rule their people with an iron fist, and in the process, losing land would take away from that process. The thing is, though, all three of these leaders are actually hated by their own people, and the US's influence within the nation is actually very strong. That's where we step in. Existing solutions also actually exist, but former President Ronald Reagan once said that the 9 most dangerous words you'll ever hear are, "We're from the government and we're here to help." While unfortunately he may be right, that circumstance doesn't actually only apply to the US, but also to countries like Iraq, Iran, and Syria, as well as Turkey. But an existing solution is actually that of sanctions. While it's more of an idealistic sanction, things like economic sanctions actually have helped in the past, because they increase American leverage because of things like decreasing trade embargoes within other nations. Another existing solution is that of a referendum. The US actually didn't encourage any referendum, but not too far ago, President Recep Erdogan of Turkey actually held a referendum in which his own representatives of Turkey and the representatives of the Kurdish state actually came together and talked over the process. Now, the referendum and the point of it was to create a Kurdish state, but the problem is, Recep Erdogan and his entire administration despise the Kurds altogether. So obviously enough, 99% of his entire administration voted against it, and also obviously enough, the Kurds voted for their own state. But because of that political gridlock, it becomes extremely difficult to actually get anything passed whatsoever. A final existing solution is a partition. This is a map of Iraq. Iraq is currently split ideologically into two main sects based on its primary religion, that of Islam. As you can see, the Sunni sect of Islam actually reside more in the west, and the Shia reside more in the east. Now, the thing is, the Kurds reside more in the northern territory of the country. And while there hasn't been a legitimate partition, running this off of an ideological one is always the way to start. Now, we can just do this with simple ways, but talks have already been going within Iraq's leaders and its administration altogether. That brings us to my own solution. My solution is a compilation of all of the previous ones I said, except it's 10 times better, because I made improvements based off of the past one. However, it's important to look at one crucial aspect that combines them all together. Specifically that's of diplomacy. My solution is running off of diplomacy. First, it partitions the entire Iraqi state into specific regions based off of what the people vote on. Second, there's a referendum between Turkey and Iraq and Iran and Syria as well, including those of Kurdish representatives. So everyone is included on the board. And a final thing that we're going to do is sanction the Syrian state and the Iraqi state to have more leverage over what happens in the country altogether. At the end of the day, though, I'm going to present it to the US State Department and possibly get it passed by the Congress. And after all of that, create a UN resolution to definitively solve the problem altogether. Peace can only come within time. And while time does heal, it's our responsibility to make sure that it does do that and doesn't prolong it. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and learned something.